Well, the goal for today is to replace this. And this is the Auger motor and gearbox. Here's the motor. It spins pretty fast. And there's a series of planetary gears in here that slow it down so that this shaft turns at 1 RPM, 1 revolution per minute. And that goes right up under here where the auger is in the stove. My stove stopped dropping pellets the other day, and everything else seems to be working fine. Everything kind of starts up and hums. It tries to start, but it can't because there are no pellets coming in. So I'm assuming it's the motor. I ordered one. I'll need one eventually, even if it isn't. So the first thing I want to do is check this motor out and see if that's the problem or if it's something else. And then if it is, put this one in. I can see one thing that's wrong right now. Here's the motor and the two wires that connect to it. I pulled one off and I pulled the other one off, but the connector is actually pulled out and hanging by a thin wire. I don't think that's stopping it from moving, and I do want to plug my patch cord in to try this out to see what's actually going on up here. This is the motor, but this is the shaft that goes up to the auger. So I don't know if you can see, but right there is the shaft of the motor, or the armature of the motor, and it is spinning. But right up there is the armature coming out that goes to the auger, and that's not turning. So that means the motor's running, but the gearbox is shot. And I did hear some grinding before, so I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And I've got a patch cord connected to it. I have it connected directly to power, so I don't have to turn the stove on, but I can run the motor. And the motor's running good, but this isn't turning in here. When I take the motor off, I'm going to try to turn the auger by hand just to make sure that it's not blocked, and then we'll go from there. So at this point, here's the motor and the gearbox. There's really nothing holding it on except this collar and this set screw. And there are some stops over here, so it can't turn while it's trying to turn the auger. I've loosened this with a very tiny wrench, and I need to get in here and push this apart because it is tight. And they don't always come off this hard. So there's the suspect mechanism. It's the collar. Now, a lot of these will have an Allen screw in here instead of this. But either way, they both work good. So let me put this back in here, and I am going to put this screw in a little, and I'm going to see if this auger turns good. It should, because I did move the screw around here with the pliers. Oh yeah, it turns good. While I'm in here, I'm going to replace the igniter because that went last year, and I've been starting the stove using a propane torch, which is very easy to do, so it's not worth pulling the stove out for nothing. But I've got to test the igniter first to see if that's really the problem. Okay, I don't know if you can exactly see the meter on the needle down there, but when I take the two connections for the new igniter and put them on here, the needle moves, which means the coil in here is all connected, and that's what heats up in order to start the stove. So new igniter, you get a meter reading. And I've got the two connections that go to the old igniter that's still installed, and when I touch this, there's no movement of the needle at all. So the igniter in the stove is bad. It isn't a blown fuse or a connection or something. It's bad. The only problem with igniters on many stoves, and this is one of them, is they are hard to get to. So I'm gonna have to work at one screw out, but look at how almost impossible it is to get to this one. So I have screwed the driver at an angle, and it went in enough, and the screw is coming out. Putting it back in at this angle though is going to be fun. So there's the culprit. 18 years old, I'm not complaining. And out with the old, in with the new. And they are the same. Now, there are a lot of different igniters. This is a standard one that's used in a lot of stoves. And that's probably why I got it so quickly. And why I'll probably be able to get it for a long time to come. Now, this motor will be situated this way in the stove, and I need this shaft to be right about here, the flat spot on the shaft. So I need to turn this on and let it rotate around till it's right about here. And this thing only rotates at 1 RPM, so it's going to take a second. Right about there should do it. Shaft is right there. Reconnect the 2 wires for the igniter. And put the 2 on the motor. Of course, it's AC, so there's no polarity. Okay. Now, if I was smart, I'd get a zip tie to tie this up. So I think I'll do that. There. And we'll cut off the tail. Now, these stoves are made in Vancouver, Canada. Remember, this is an Enviro, and this particular model is called the Milan. It's no longer made. They do have a couple of other fireplace inserts, though, that are very nice. Tuck that up in there. There we go. Okay, job completed. Igniter, wires connected, new motor and gearbox connected with a collar. Those bearings actually look pretty good. See that? Just above the collar is that brass thing. That's one of the bearings. Now this thing only goes 1 RPM, so we don't need any high-speed bearings in there. This is a brass collar. There's one on the other end of the auger up there too. And these have lasted a long time, and they've been very good. Well, you didn't think you'd get away with this listening to a retired teacher without getting a little pellet stove 101. This won't take long, should you care to stick around to see it. First of all, before I get a bunch of people asking, this cart is a hydraulic lift cart from Harbor Freight. It comes in 2 varieties. It'll lift 1,000 pounds, and there's one that'll lift 500. And the prices are according to that also. It's very well made, and I have the 1,000-pound one. Not that I need it, but the 1,000-pound one lifts high enough to reach the tailgate of my F-150 pickup truck. So that's why I have the 1,000-pound one. Otherwise, I'd have the 500. Big hydraulic piston down there. You pull on this handle and it slowly goes down. Swivel wheels on one end anyway. And it brings things up, as you can see, to waist level to work on. I was sitting in a chair doing this. Otherwise, I'd be down on the floor on my back putting this in. And it's not fun, particularly as you get older. Now, pellet stoves are really basically the same as far as how they run. Some have a few more parts, a few more bells and whistles. I like them very simple. If this stove should ever die on me completely, which it never will because it's just parts, and as long as I can get them, I can put them in. And these, by the way, these are the first parts I've ever put in it after 18 years. So I've been satisfied with this stove. I have no complaints. It doesn't owe me anything. But like I said, all stoves are basically the same. And I'll show you kind of like what's in them, and might help you do some repairs. And it basically has to do with the flow of air. Here on this side of the stove is the combustion blower, and this is where the exhaust comes out. This stove has a very unique connection system. It's a buckle, so that if you look at the business end, there's a metal plate, and it has kind of a hook at the top. The metal plate fits in this groove, and then this buckle comes and grabs the hook and pulls it in, and it pulls it in very tight. I have a gasket on here, which is still in good shape. I replaced it last year, and it holds very good. When I want to clean the stove out, I reach in with one hand, flip the buckle, and flip this piece up, and the whole thing comes off. So it makes it so much easier inside a fireplace. Now, the combustion blower creates a negative pressure in the stove. It sucks the air out. Let's go look at where it comes in. Intake in the back of the stove, and this stove needs to be cleaned. But if you look right there, there's a large pipe that just goes out to the back. That's all. It's just open to the back. The small one is where we put the igniter in. That's where the igniter is. But this large one is the air intake. The air intake goes around this burn box, which has a lot of holes in it all around, and it disperses the air, and it comes in on all sides of the box and fans the flames so that the pellets will catch and they'll burn. Behind these plates is kind of an open area. And right in here on mine, on this side, is where the vent is. Now, if you look right down here, here's where I control it. And if you could see inside here, there's a metal plate that's opening and closing to that combustion blower. If you have a stove that is freestanding, there's usually a pull-out knob on the side, on the outside of the stove, to adjust the air intake. When you turn the stove on and the door is closed, you must know there's a gasket around the door here. The air is drawn through that combustion blower, drawn into the pipe that I just showed you, and it creates a negative pressure inside the chamber. That negative pressure is very important, and this is how it's controlled. Right back here is a switch, and this is a vacuum switch. There's a small hose that goes down here and connects to the inside of the chamber. So it senses that the combustion blower is pulling the air out, and it creates a little bit of a suction here, and the switch closes and lets the stove start. If you left the door open, the stove would not start because it can't, there's no little pressure coming in here as it's being pulled into the box, and this switch will not flip. So if you should ever have a time when the stove won't start at all, or you turn it on, it starts briefly, and then it turns off, it's because this switch said, hey, I'm not getting a negative pressure. So you buy one of these, and you definitely buy one of these silicone hoses that are made special for it, and replace the whole thing. Sometimes this hose will look perfectly good, but it'll be bad. There'll be a crack someplace that you can't see. I've had that happen a couple of times with other stoves. These pressure switches are not expensive. In a lot of stove, it's a round disc about the size of a mayonnaise jar cover. They last a long time. I've never replaced this one. I don't know if I'll ever have to. Very easy, couple screws, hook a hose on, hook a couple wires on it, and it lets the stove start if it detects that this is drawing out and pulling pressure and pulling a vacuum on the inside of the stove. Now, in the startup process, this turns on, and depending on the setting, motor spins and it turns the auger at about one revolution per minute. Never turns it faster, never slower on most stoves. It's timing. This is time, so if you turn the stove up, out of about 8 seconds, it may turn 5. If you turn the stove down, out of 8 seconds, it may turn 3. And that determines the pellet drop. Sometimes you can hear it. There'll be a slight grinding noise. It'll go like, How was that? Did I do a good job with the sound? And when you set the temperature that you want, it just has to do with how often this thing turns on and how long. Now, notice there's a little device there with 2 wires connected to the combustion blower. The hot air is going out into the vent here. And as it heats up, this switch stays closed so that the stove can stay started. If after a while this does not get hot, the stove will turn off. This is called a proof of fire switch, so that if this doesn't heat up, it won't stay on, and it'll cut the power to everything. So that if that should be happening to you, this little switch is about $15. 2 screws, 2 wires, replace it. On the other side of the stove is another switch. Mine has a little button on it, so I can reset it. If the firebox should get too hot, and I've turned my stove up to 5 and a couple of times awakened, and the stove was off. If it gets too hot, this thing will flip, as it's a safety switch, and I have to pull the stove out a little bit and push my finger on there and reset it. Some stoves do not have a reset button. It just gets too hot, it opens, and once it cools off, it closes on its own. It's called a snap switch. Again, very inexpensive, 2 screws, 2 wires. If your stove won't stay started after it heats up, this thing has probably gone bad, or you need to reset it. And again, for about $15, you can replace it. Here's that pressure switch again from another angle, 2 wires, and it's a box that has a switch in it when the pressure hits it. So what makes it all go? The control board. Now on some stoves, the control board is where the controls are. The whole thing in the back is a control board. On my stove, it's separate, and then with this ribbon cable, it's connected to this switch panel. And this control board really reads all of these sensors on the stove, and when it should start and when it should turn off. And it has a timer on it, so that if you do turn this up on my stove, it's 1 through 5, this controls how fast or how long the motor will stay started. Mine has a series of fuses for all of the sensors and the igniter and everything. Many stoves just have 1 fuse. If something goes bad, 1 fuse blows and everything goes out. I have never had a fuse blow on this. I think it would only blow if something were seriously wrong that caused something to be heating up and needed to be, the power needed to be cut. And that's what fuses are for. They're for safety. Now there's one last motor and blower on here. Mine is a snail type. Many of them are a squirrel cage. They're long and narrow and go along the side over here. This puts the air in the room. It's really quite simple. Air comes in the blower, and mine it goes up into an area that's behind the stove. It's an air chamber. And then up here, there are some fins that I try to keep clean, and this is an air exchanger. So the air from that fan never, ever goes into the burn part of the stove. It's just collecting the heat from behind it and then pumping it into the room. And on my stove, it's through these vents, and you can see those slots right there, right up here. Many stoves, instead of having a system that looks like that, will be a series of pipes that come up, and you can actually see the holes on the front of the stove where the pipes come out. So this is what takes the heat that the stove is making and in the burn box, and then pumps it up and out the front of the stove. This blower only comes on after this switch says the stove is hot enough. And when this hits about 150 degrees, when this flips, then this blower starts. So when you first turn your stove on, you'll hear a motor running. That's the combustion blower, the one that's getting the negative pressure out of the stove to make air go through it for the fire. And then after it heats up, your room blower will start. Some stoves have a separate control for the room blower so that you can turn it on at any time you want to. Many stoves, and mine, do not have this. It just turns on when the stove is hot enough, and this blower also turns off after the stove cools down. Because after it's cooled down to a certain point, there's no point in blowing the air into the room because it's not hot. So that's kind of Pellet Stove 101. If anybody has anything to add, or if I got anything wrong, just chime in at the bottom. We're all in for accurate information. Maybe more information than you wanted to know. And as my wife Joyce will tell you, say hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Be careful what you ask for when you ask Dan for anything, because you never know. Because she's listened to a lot of lengthy explanations of stuff that really she didn't even need to hear. She's the best. And what is this? Well, this is a trolley, and I can bring the stove out to this distance before a stop stops it. And this is a swivel for a rocking chair, and it's rated at 400 pounds, and I can turn this. Now I can't turn it completely around because it hits the sides of this, and I can't bring it out anymore because my hearth is only so wide. But I can turn it enough that I can get around the back and clean it good, and it'll also turn around the other way. I would like to modify it somehow to also be able to come out further, so I could just bring it right out and spin the stove right around. But it would entail bringing some rails out and something onto the floor that I could put down and brace it up. There's the tracks for it. It's bolted in cement in the back. And there are some, you can hear the wheels, that's for sure. The wheels are under there. They're steel wheels. Oh, there they are, right there. Maybe they need a little oil now. Well, there you have it. Wasn't exactly Pellet Stove 101. It's just a guy with a pellet stove. And I thought I would record what I was doing while I did it, and maybe someone can find it useful. Thanks for watching.